in which we will discuss QM Standard 3, Assessment and Measurement, and QM Standard 4, Instructional Materials. To review our QM rubric, there are 8 general standards and 43 specific standards under the general standards. In the first lecture, we reviewed the course overview and introduction and the 9 specific standards. And then in the last overview, the last lecture, we went over learning objectives and competencies and the 5 specific standards. Today we're going to go over General Standard 3, Assessment and Measurement, which has 5 specific standards. And then we're going to go over General Standard 4, Instructional Materials, which has 6 specific standards. Next week we'll go over General Standard 5 and General Standard 6. And then finally we'll end our lecture series with the discussion of General Standard 7, Learner Support, and General Standard 8, Accessibility and Usability. And again, just a quick reminder of the QM scoring rubric, how to become QM certified, is that you are scored on your specific standards. There are 43, and they are weighted by assigning them points, 3 points, 2 points, and 1 point. There are 21 3-point standards. They are essential. We'll go over that today for 3 and 4. The essential standards, then all 21 must be met, become QM certified. Then you have 14 2-point standards, which are very important, and 8 1-point standards. And then after you score on your 21 3-point standards, then you must score 84 out of the remaining 99 points on your 2 and 1-point standards. And if you get your score 84 or above, then you become QM certified. Okay, so let's look at General Standard number 3, Assessment and Measurements. Again, we have the 5 specific standards. 3 are essential, 3-point standards. 3.1 is assessments measure the stating learning objectives or competencies. 3.2, the grading policy is clearly stated. 3.3, specific and descriptive criteria are provided for the evaluation of learners' work and are tied to the course grading policy. 3.4, the assessment instruments selected are sequenced, varied, and suited to learner work being assessed. That's a 2-point standard. And we finish with 3.5, also a 2-point standard, which means it's optional. The course provides learners with multiple opportunities to track their learning progress. Okay, so let's look at Standard 3.1. The assessments measure the stating learning objectives or competencies. The key here is alignment. Again, the course assessments, your exams and papers, then should be consistent with your course in learning module learning objectives and competencies that we went over in Unit 2. Your course assessments then should measure the accomplishment of those objectives and competencies. And again, we also look to the alignment that 4.1, the instructional materials, support this process. Learning activities also become supportive of advancing the competencies, learning objectives, and that the course tools then support the learning objectives and competencies. If, again, a special situation, it is clear that if the learners then meet the learning objectives or competencies stated in the course materials and learning activities, they can successfully complete the assessments. Okay, so it should be clear that if the learners then meet the learning objectives or competencies, then they should successfully complete the assessments. And then both the course, Unit 2 course and module level competencies must be met. Okay, so examples of learning objective competency assessment alignment. A problem analysis demonstrates critical thinking skills. And the problem analysis being the learning objective, and the assessment, and the critical thinking skills being the learning objective. A composition shows writing skills. The composition is the assessment. The writing skills are the learning objective. And the video learner presentation in a foreign language shows mastery of the language or the objective. And then finally, participation in a game reveals critical thinking and analytical decision-making skills. And again, it's useful to see for this standard to look at learning objectives that aren't aligned, that do not meet the standard. And here would be the learning objective or competencies to be able to write a persuasive essay, but the assessment's a multiple choice test. And then the objective or competencies to create a body of work that illustrates photographic vision, but the assessment is a 25-page thesis about contemporary photography. And then again, so we have some special situations. Again, if the assessment's designed to meet university level objectives, then this needs to be stated. And then for competency-based course, learners can acquire objectives or competencies through life or work experiences. So, 3.1, you can look at that in your face. A lot of common sense, matching the assessment up. I think a key to that is the Bloom's verb that you use. Look at that verb, and then does it make sense that assessment is measuring that learning objective? Specific Standard 3.2 says that the course grading policy is clearly stated, and if we look at the annotation, then a clear written statement explains how grades are calculated. The points, percentages, and weights for each course grade is clearly stated, and the relationship between points, percentages, and weights is clearly explained. Also, the QM rubric advises the raters to see that the instructor has a clearly stated late policy. So what we look for is then again that all your activities and tests, that you list all your activities and tests that would determine your final grade. Be done in the syllabus, could be done in your both probably your syllabus and then your course orientation area or introduction area. An explanation between the final grades and the points earned. Usually I include a table in my syllabus. Explanation between points and percentages of both of these. 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 89 is a B. Go from there. And that would knock out those two bullet points. And then a clearly stated late policy for late point deductions. That gets a little tougher. But again, a lot of it again in your syllabus, and then in your a lot of you I think already include these explanations of the grading policy, of how your exams are going to weight into the grades, and how your papers are, and how many points they are, and how that makes up your final grade. So I think you would want that on your syllabus, and then also in your course in some kind of orientation or beginning area. Moving on to Specific Standard 3.3, which is also an essential standard worth 3 points. Specific and descriptive criteria are provided for the evaluation of learners' work and are tied to the course grading policy. So if we look at the annotation, we looked at if learners are provided with complete and clear descriptions of the grading criteria, and that this criteria is provided up front at the beginning of the course. Syllabus, again, course introduction area. The criteria provides clear guidance on instructors' expectations for coursework and participation, and the criteria gives learners information on how they will be graded. Again, the best practices state the criteria for evaluation of all graded work. Personally, I like, again, using rubrics or some kind of stated grading policies. Also, if it's a discussion board, like for example, a description of how the learner's participation and discussion boards will be graded, including the number of postings each week, the required level of responsiveness to classmates, and the quality of comments, and the grade the learners can expect for the varied levels of performance should be someplace in your syllabus or where you start your discussion boards. But I like having rubrics for all papers, test, again, explanation, essay test, model essays, scoring essays, explanations. So specific standard 3.3 then we're going to make sure we have specific and descriptive criteria for evaluation of the learner's work, and is tied in with grading policy. Specific standard 3.4 is a 2-point standard, but it just tells us that the assessment instruments selected are sequenced, varied, and suited to the learner work being assessed. And here's the key: is to have multiple assessments. It could be multiple choice tests, true, false, and matching assessments that are self-scoring, and then in the alternative performance and authentic assessments, where learners are asked to answer a prompt or stimulus, which is graded by the instructor. But you include interviews, journals, portfolios, exhibits. But the assessment should be varied to provide learners with multiple ways to develop mastery and accommodate diverse learners. Assessment should be sequenced to allow learners to build upon previous knowledge. A little bit on 3.4, some examples here of that meet the standard. For example, a series of assessments that progress from a definition of terms to a short paper explaining theoretical concepts to a term paper that includes a critical analysis of a journal article using theoretical concepts. So it sounds like a really good assignment too. Just multiple types of assessments. That you have some kind of something that, like, I look at measures the reading, like a multiple choice test or something like that, and then have some something with looking at writing and more creative skills and analytical skills in terms of discussion boards. You can have essay exams. You can have like the different types of questions on essay exams. But again, the idea here is to get some kind of multiple type of assessments. Examples that do not meet the standard then would be if your assessments are a multiple choice only test. And then also if, like, for example, the first assessment asks the learner to use library skills, but we don't go over library skills until later on in the course, the third or fourth week. It would be out of sequence. That would not meet the standard. And then the QM people put that, again, be careful with, again, something like law school courses where no assessments are done, until the final exam or the first 12 weeks, and then a series of papers and exams end the course, your typical law course there. That's not going to meet our standard. I don't know what they're going to do about the law courses, though. If they're going to change that or not. With the law courses, of course, you have one exam at your end of the course. Most law courses, that might be an exception, but you want to vary your assessments throughout the course. Discussion board posts based solely on the frequency, response, and word count instead of criteria also do not meet these objectives. And then finally, specific standard 3.5 is another 2-point standard, which means it's not required. It's very important, though. The course provides learners with multiple opportunities to track their progress. In your annotation, it just says that learning is more effective if learners receive frequent feedback. Here we have some examples. Written assignments that call for a submission or draft for the instructor to comment upon improvement. I suppose you have a series of papers, then you're going to be marking them up for improvement. Self-mastery tests that include informative feedback with each answer choice. Self-scoring practice quizzes. I call them reading quizzes. Practice written assignments. Peer reviews and critiques. Model papers or essays are provided to learners. And then sample answers are also provided to learners. Both very good practice for when you sign papers or essay exams. Specific Standard 3.5, the course provides learners with multiple opportunities to track their learning progress. And that sums up General Standard 3, assessment and measurement. And so let's move on to General Standard 4, instructional materials. And if we look at General Standard 4, the first specific standard we come up with is Standard 4.1, essential standard worth 3 points, that the instructional materials contribute to the achievement of the stated course learning objectives or competencies. Again, the keys alignment. Your instructional materials are going to be your text, your textbook, articles, audios, YouTube audios. You might have the students review, and that they align with your course and module learning objectives or competencies by contributing to the accomplishment of those objectives by integrating them with, again, your assessments, your course tools, and your learning activities. Again, common sense. Again, it's going to go off of, that your textbook instructional materials may include a textbook, publisher-created materials, multimedia, and websites, and that these materials align with the learning objectives or competencies in a clear and direct way and provide the resources the learner needs to achieve the learning objectives and competencies. So I guess that's the way to see this, is the instructional materials are the resources. In your instructional materials, can the learner go into those materials to do their assessments? Do they give them the information or direction on how to do the assessments? And then does that line up with your course and unit module level learning objectives or competencies? Substandard 4.2 is another essential standard worth 3 points. It tells us both the purpose of the instructional materials and then how the materials are to be used for learning activities are clearly explained. So here, the annotation, the learners are provided with the explanation of the instructional materials and other resources and how they're used in the course and how each will help them achieve their learning objective and competency. So to look at this, we want to go to the examples. One, that you might have links to external websites to indicate the purpose of the links, or they're completely self-evident. Again, maybe you're teaching the APA. You have links to, again, the APA website, Purdue Online APA website. That's pretty much self-evident with the APA. The function of interactive games or exercise is clearly explained or self-evident, again, with the learning objectives or competencies. And also, again, it would also be clear if your book is divided up into chapters that correspond to the units. The student is immediately going to see that. If you're using, again, textbook, if you're basing your course and unit objectives on the textbook, that's going to automatically line up over there for you. But that's a good way of passing this standard, is that your book is divided up into chapters that correspond to the units. These instructional materials are providing the raw material for these units. But the purpose of all instructional materials, the books used in the course, should be clearly explained to learners or self-evident. Thinking of like your textbook, you could have a theory, and then you could demonstrate your theory or have a YouTube lecture on your theory. It should be self-evident or explained to the reader the link between those two learning materials. Okay, substandard 4.2. Again, the annotation. I'm sorry, we just Okay, we have a double there. Substandard 4.3, moving on. It's a 2-point standard. So what's substandard 4, your first two specific standards are essential. The next three, 4.3, 4.4, and 4.5, are all 2-point standards, and we close with a 1-point standard, 4.6. 4.3 tells us that all instructional materials used in the course are appropriately cited. And here they mean all materials in the course. So we're going to look at publisher materials, instructor-created materials. Again, if you have an article or something that you put up, they should, I guess, cite to the professor. Publisher materials, textbooks, images, graphics, tables, audios, videos, websites, and other forms of mass media. Citations should include at the minimum, the author, owner name, date of publication, research title, and URL or source. So that would be substandard 4.3, a 2-point standard. All instructional materials in the course are appropriately cited. And then to close out substandard 4, I piggybacked these standards on our last slide. A lot of this is self-evident. Substandard 4.2, 2 points that the instructional materials are current. Again, this is a call not made by a date, but it's going to be a call made by an expert in the field. So if you, I take it, are expert in the course you're teaching, then is your material current? It's going to depend on what it is, of course, rather than any kind of specific date. Because you're going to have articles, very important articles that the date's not going to matter. Declaration of Independence, Constitution. You might have some legal cases. Again, Miranda was 1966. That's still current. And then again, you might have other materials that you have to update. But that's like a call for the subject matter expert, or if you're the expert, to make sure or to make an argument that your instructional materials are current. Pacific Standard 4.5 is also a 2-point, very important standard, that a variety of instructional materials are used in the course. And this can include textbooks, other publications, instructor-created material, websites, multimedia such as YouTube sites. So just simply that the standard is met if you just have a variety of instructional materials. You use more than a textbook. And then to close out our discussion of standard 4.5 is specific standard 4.5, close our discussion on general standard 4 instructional materials, that the distinction between required and optional course materials is clearly explained. That's 1 point. So if you include required and optional course materials in your course, simply here that you just clearly mark it for the students, and you get your 1 point here. It's pretty much self-explanatory. So that's the end of our presentation for General Standards 3 on assessments and measurement, and General Standards 4 on instructional material. And again, once again, happy online teaching to all of you, and I hope you can join me next week when we talk about General Standards 5 and 6.